Hey, everybody, I imagine I'm Frank Costantino right now. Frank is this, if you don't know Frank Costantino, he's a signature member of New England Watercolor and an old friend of Tony Connor's. And he could not be here today, but sent me a text message saying he wasn't going to be here today, but he has a nice introduction for Tony. So I'm going to read his introduction. I first came to know Tony Connor as my many watercolor seminars for Boston Society of Architects, where Tony recently and early retired from the phone company, wanted to learn about perspective and architectural illustration and watercolor as a secondary career. Tony was very insightful, a hard worker, asked many questions, and broadened his watercolor skills from other paint workshops he had taken. Tony, from his other job, was also tech savvy and helped me with a website and other great useful insights. Together with 3 other local residents on their estate in North Bennington, we founded and ran Plein Air Vermont, PAVT, a highly successful national event for 5 years, attracting artists from around the country to Bennington's scenic places, plus having the event artworks show and top winners in national magazines. With diligent marketing skills, Tony continued to develop his watercolor skills, entering shows, winning awards, and creating series of in-person and more recently online workshops. His outreach extended with plein air travel trips to Italy, which have proven successful too. Tony is a natural teacher and brings a dynamic yet welcoming and comfortable teaching style to his workshops and demos. News is very lucky to have such a fine artist like Tony joining so many terrific watercolors in News membership. Sincerely, Frank Costantino. So, Tony.
Thank you, Gail and Tony. Thanks, everybody, for being here to watch this demo. It's always nerve-wracking. Hopefully, I'll pull it off. Perhaps not. Actually, I probably will. But now that I've said that, I probably won't. In any case, what I thought I would do is paint a season that nobody paints, which is springtime. Early springtime, this time of the year when the leaves are still off the trees. There's not much out there but brown and gray, and but it's not winter. It doesn't look like winter anymore. It actually looks a little bit lighter. You know, the sun is getting strong. I'll hold these up for the audience in a second, for this audience in a second. But I've got a couple pieces here, one based on the other. So this was actually the first one that I did. This one, I tend to date things. So I did this one March 14th in 2013. And what's today? Is today the 16th? So almost exactly 12 years ago, I did this scene. In Vermont, we're known for, in the spring, mud. It's called mud season up there. And this is a painting essentially of that. In March, that had to be an early mud season. But anyway, mud season in Vermont. And I don't have a date on this one, so I don't know when I did it, but it's more recent. And it's based on this painting, but it's a scene that I hope captures light a little bit better. One of the things I like about this season is that the light, the sun is strengthening, and the fields are catching light, and all of that brown gets lit up, and it becomes nice and warm. And I thought that would be a great subject for a demo, even though nobody really likes this time of the year or likes to paint this time of the year. I thought that, let me hold them up for you. So this is the original, again, from 2013. And this is the more recent one. And the painting today will be kind of based on this. I like, in my work, I like capturing light. It's really, for me, it really is the subject, especially in the landscape. I have a couple pieces here, which back here, behind me on my left. Both really are subjects that capture light, different kind of light in the scene on the left than on the right. That piece is actually a plein air piece. It was a plein air demo I did down in Lenox, Massachusetts a few years ago. This is a studio piece, which, by the way, Yale, this is the one, I missed the meeting. I got involved in a painting in the studio on the day of our last board meeting, and I missed the meeting because I was so involved with painting, I completely forgot. So this is the painting that's responsible for that delinquency on my part. So that's kind of the idea, to get a nice view of early spring light, again, warming the landscape up. So it'll be something along those lines. The other thing is that I really like is the color cerulean blue. I love to work with it in watercolor. It's got really interesting characteristics. Anybody who paints in watercolor and uses it knows that it's a very granular paint. I'll put my palette in the, put my palette on the screen for the moment. I do want this to be a warm painting with warm light and so forth, but almost always when you've got something warm, you want to have some cool notes, and if you've got something cool, you want warm notes. So my cool notes will, for the most part, be cerulean blue. It's not a strong color in mixtures, but it does impart its granularity in mixtures, so you get this nice texture out of it, and that's great for landscapes. So it's another reason I like it, and I'm going to be using it with this really low intensity color set that I have here. I do have one red. This is a color called quinacridone burnt scarlet, which, by the way, Frank wrote that nice introduction for me, which I appreciate. I learned about this color actually in one of those seminars that he talked about way back in the 2000s when I was learning architectural illustration from Frank. This color is great for brick. It's a great base for brick buildings when you're painting them. That's where I learned about it. But I'm really using a bunch of what we would call earth colors: burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw sienna. I'll use a little bit of some brighter yellow to get, again, some of that warmth onto the landscape as well. But it's really going to be this low intensity color set. This red is low intensity, even though it's a red. It's a cool red, but it's a low intensity version. It's kind of grayed out. Quinacridone. There's a lot of quinacridone colors out there these days. This is Daniel Smith's version. Quinacridone burnt scarlet. So anyway, you can see it on the screen there. Again, it's a low intensity cool red. And again, it's going to be a low intensity color set for a time of year that has low intensity color in it for the most part, and we'll focus on getting the light to show up. I did do a few mixtures yesterday in the studio. This is actually some of the mixtures that I'll use. This is cerulean with the burnt scarlet. This is cerulean with burnt umber. This is cerulean with raw umber. That's cerulean with, I think, burnt sienna. So I get these nice, again, low intensity mixtures. I can balance warm and cool with them, hopefully capturing that nice warm light, which is the goal here. I do start paintings with drawn compositions. So this is really the composition I'm working with today. A little bit of a value study, except the values are going to stay lighter in this painting. I don't want it heavy. I want a nice feeling of light, again, for that nice warm early spring light. So I'm working with that drawing for this audience. It's this drawing up here. And hopefully, again, I'll get this pulled off. I work, when I paint, I like to work very wet, very fluid. I do a lot of work right into those wet washes. I often describe it as working the whole painting at the same time, which I tend to do. So this will go, even though I've only got an hour or so, and I'm working on a half sheet, it should go pretty quickly. If you have a question while I'm working, shout it out. I may not answer immediately, but I will. It will go in the input bay, and it'll sit there until I've got a moment to speak, and then I will speak the answer. If I have the answer, which in some cases I don't have the answer. But all right. I'm going to start with the cerulean, actually, and The other feature, I didn't really mention it here, as you can see, I've got puddles.
That up so that you see his bald head.
I've got puddles in both versions. And again, in the spring in Vermont, there's lots of mud. There's also lots of puddles. This year we had a lot of snow, so there'll be a lot of snow. Actually, most of it's melted, but there'll be snow melt. There'll be mud on the roads, puddles in the road. And I drew into the layout here, I drew in some tire tracks. So some vehicles come down the hill here. There's a puddle at the bottom of that hill, that little rise, a couple tracks leading out of it, and of course pointing right to that tree, which is really the main subject here. Even the light is really the main subject, but the tree is sort of a focal point for the whole painting. But I will start in the sky. Generally, if it's a landscape, I start in the background. That's what I'll do here. And again, I work really, really fluid. And as Yale mentioned, I teach a lot. And I know I frustrate my students because a bit of my work is improv. I sort of start working, and as the painting develops, I've described it actually as a conversation. I do something, and then I let the medium flow around, and it says something back, and I try to have a conversation, and usually it's a conversation. Sometimes it's an argument. But,
Gotta be careful, you'll have to lose those arguments.
yeah, I have lost a number of those arguments, many of them. All right, this is where actually the burnt scarlet comes in. I want to get this. There's a distant hill back there, which light's coming from the left in this painting, and I want that hill lit up. So the burnt scarlet will help do that, as will some Roth.
So when I asked paper, why are you using paper? Well, it looks like you're using heavy paper.
It's 140-pound arches, cold press.
You starting on dry paper or wet paper?
Yeah, dry paper. I rarely start on wet paper. I use so much water, as you can see, that the paper gets wet pretty quickly. So I usually start on dry paper. I also really have a thing about too many hard edges in a painting. So I like softer edges and rough edges, and I like those to really predominate in the painting rather than the hard edges. So at this stage of the game, I'm setting up a lot of those softer edges. I need some blue down here. So the sky would be reflecting in these puddles. I'm going to get some of my sky color down in here. And actually, I may develop a little bit on this foreground road. Sometimes I lift. Here's a place where it really needs to be lifted, so I'll do that. I just blot the brush, and once it's thirsty, I can lift up some of that paint that's in there and water. I try not to leave white spots that are going to stand out too much in that initial layer.
What brush are you?
Now, this is a 2-inch Robert Simmons, it's called a Skyflow. I use both rounds and flats. And in fact, I'm going to use flats now to get more of that distant hill. So I've got the sky in. I'm going to work into the distant ground where there are hills. There's some tree lines back in there. And I use a technique called dry and wet. I learned it a long time ago when I was really learning this medium. I learned the technique, but it wasn't until probably 10 or so years ago that I really got a handle on how this works and how it works best. So I get thick paint. So you can see this, it's not even a puddle, it's a combination of burnt scarlet and cerulean together. And it's thick. You can see it's not running around like those other puddles. with that thick paint, I can start to get a little bit more sense of shape. It needs to be a little thicker. So the paper is really wet, which I want, but I want this really, really thick paint. And I go right into the wet area with the thick paint. And if I have too much water in the brush, I can just blot it at the ferrule. And then I can get that nice edge for the distant hill. A little cooler over here. The hills are turned away from the light a bit, so it's a little cooler and a little darker. And where, when you're doing this particular technique, when you get a edge like this, it sort of blends out and you don't want it, again, I just go back in and do some lifting. There are some trees in the foreground, and I am making marks now to get to sort of paint around those. Leaves me some light areas to work with later in the painting. And again, there's distant tree lines back there as well. A little bit more gray in that case. So something like cerulean and maybe burnt umber. And I can start to get in the distant tree lines back here. There's a couple individual trees right in here, but and if I want to show some light on them, you know, again, that nice bright, warm, early spring light is hitting here. I'll just mingle in something else. In this case, it's raw sienna. Again, I've got some trees here in the foreground that overlap that space. So I do try to paint between them, leave those white spaces. It doesn't always work, but I do attempt it. I'm going to get a little brighter yellow. This is a cerulean yellow, or it's actually a mixture. I'm going to get some brighter yellow back in this field. Again, that nice warm sunlight. The edges of these different areas are connecting. As you can see, they're blending together.
What yellow were you using?
This is actually an cerulean mixture. I think it's Da Vinci. And I think it's called a cerulean mix. And again, I want that for the nice warm sunlight. I'm going to get it on this foreground field here. I have some places I have to lift a little bit. Not that it's a big deal at this stage. Everything is fluid, wet. It's going to dry lighter, as you all know. Maddeningly, this medium is sometimes uncooperative, value-wise. Notice that I missed a little bit of my hill. And I think the paper's drying a bit too much for me to keep going with this, so I'm going to have to dry it. I've got a bloom happening here, which I'll pick up. And when I get to a stage where I'm ready to dry the painting, I look for, again, hard edges. The hard edges that I'll have in the painting will get set up later. And as I've already said, at this stage, I really want to set up a lot of the softer textures of the scene and the landscape. This area is going to be a bit of a problem. Okay. I think I'll dry it. If you have them, this is a good time for questions. Actually, it's not because I'm going to have the hairdryer on. But you can think of them, and I'll get to you in a second.
Yeah, I've got some that asking me. People are asking me. Yeah, someone's gonna press the button and other people are saying everyone's busy. Yeah, never seen that. So someone asked, where you been getting your Robert Simmons sky flow brushes?
This brush is at least 25 years old. So where you get them now, I don't know.
Okay.
But I bought this really early on. So that's a testament to how well they wear.
Are those natural or synthetic?
This is synthetic. I do have a couple stables here. I haven't used them yet. If I do, it'll be later on. Now, this is the natural hair that Cheap Joe used to make. And then they discovered that the bristles came out pretty easily, so they stopped making it. This is called the Water Hawk. And again, it's at least 20 years old as well. But it's a natural hair brush. And everything else is a synthetic that I'm using. Okay. Yeah, any other questions? Anything else?
All right.
No? All right. This is still wet. Okay, so what I'll do now is, I think, come into the foreground. This area is important. Again, the road slopes down to that puddle. There's a couple tracks which are really important in the composition. And I think I'll start working there and building up what I hope to make look like, that glistening mud that you see in the springtime, right? If you're on a dirt road and it's muddy there, the mud is a deep, usually a dark hue because it's saturated with water, but it also glistens a little bit. And I'm going to try to set that up now. I have to paint around I want to keep the light values in those tracks that are coming around, so I have to be careful about that. But otherwise, I can kind of throw paint around again the way I did at the beginning. And again, the cerulean, I was talking about cerulean. It's got a lot of great qualities. By itself, it's a terrific sky blue color. It does not stand up well in mixtures. It really loses its identity pretty quickly, but it does impart that granularity to anything. And then if you mix it with another earth color, I'm going to start with burnt sienna here. If you mix it with something like burnt sienna, the siennas and the umbers also are granular colors. So you get this nice additional texture in there. I love that as my paintings don't have a lot of detail. So the textural quality of earth colors or cerulean blue, cobalt blue also, anything that's cobalt also has some granularity. Ultramarine has some granularity. Anything that granulates provides some visual texture. If you look back up in here, there's visual texture back in there that suggests something is going on. At this stage, you can't tell exactly what that is, but it gives this visual quality to the area and brings it alive in a way that probably wouldn't if you were using non-granular colors. Actually, here I am going to switch to the sable. What I'd like to do, left paint in that, I guess. I'm going to want rough texture in this area and actually some nice free-flowing washes. I want changes. I'm going to paint through these trees. They'll be darker anyway. I want changes in the color and value that, again, suggest that shimmering light that you get on muddy roads and other places as well. You see it on the beach. If you paint seascapes, you see it on the beach quite a bit. And these colors, the cerulean is, again, it doesn't retain its color character very well. It doesn't retain its blue character very well. But it does separate because it's a heavy granular color. It separates out of the washes. So it drops in and you get these variations in color and value just because the two colors are really not mixing all that well together. So it's another reason I really like to use cerulean. I do not want hard edge back there, so I'm going to soften this in certain places, and I'll run the brush along, maybe get some rough edge back there. By doing this, I get to join together different objects, different elements of the scene, and I don't get the separation that sort of has a tendency sometimes to pull a painting apart. Again, those tracks come up this way. I'm going to get out some burnt umber now. It's a bit darker. It leans, these colors are brown, but they're really low intensity versions of colors like, in fact, burnt umber is really a red orange, as is burnt sienna. And again, if I drag this brush quickly, you can get some of that rough edge. Again, simulating that sort of shimmery, sparkly nature of a wet, muddy road. And with, again, thicker color, I've already done this back there on the hill. I can get some changes in the color and the value that suggests there's a change in what's happening on that road. The surface, again, it's got areas that are a little bit more reflective and some places a little less reflective. I do run the brushstrokes in the direction that the tire tracks go. Again, it gives that directional indication is important for the compositional part of this, of those shapes. Again, suggests that there's tire tracks. Some vehicles run down through there. Apparently didn't get stuck because they're not there. Again, there's a bank, there's another hill over here. It has to be developed, but I'll bring the road around there. And again, with some other mixtures, this time the cerulean and burnt scarlet together, I can change the color a little bit. Run it down to, again, there's a puddle right down at that part of the road. Probably some tracks running through back here. Let me just make sure this is worth continuing, right? Do you ever happen to you step back and go, oh my God, what did I do? The bright yellow, it's Da Vinci, they call it a Ruhlian mix or a Ruhlian mixture.
And that's its name.
That's what they call it. So there's, I also have started using, I don't think I have it here, Daniel Smith sells something called cobalt yellow, and in parentheses they say Arulian, so like it's real Arulian. You know, don't get me started on these manufacturers and the paint names, but there's not that many pigments that are used for paint, and they're mixing different ones together, and they come up with this new fancy midnight blue, and we all want to run out and buy it, but it's just something you've already got on the palette probably, and I think that's what this Arulian stuff is from Da Vinci. But I'm really going to go, actually I do have some of it. Once the Da Vinci stuff is gone, I'm such a Yankee, I can't stand to mix things. I'll be going to this. So this is, Daniel Smith calls this, Arulian, and in parentheses, cobalt yellow. It's important to know the pigment code for what you're buying, particularly for some of these that they make up. This is pigment yellow 40. I know that Arulian has pigment yellow 35 in it, so it's a different paint, really. And most of those cool yellows that they're selling you these days are the pigment yellow 35. I tend to be a technician about things, in case you didn't. Maybe that just dawned on you, but I like to know my materials. I like to know what I'm working with. I like to be, there's so much about this, especially the way I paint, that's really random, the way I paint. So I like to know at least what I can expect out of the paints when I put them on the paper. And I guess that's why I'm a technician about it. I'm going to get this bank. There's a bank over here above the road level. I'm going to get this in. It's a little bit darker.
So do you make your sketches on site or do you work on photography?
I do not work from photos. I work from sketches. So I have, I brought this is a sketchbook. So everything that's in here is done on location. If you want to see it. So I use, there's not that many in there. I've really just started using it. But what I do when I'm outdoors is generally gathering information. So I call those observational sketches. I go out and paint things, and usually I do those in sketchbooks. And then I'll compose, I'll show you the other sketchbook in a second, that one over there. Then I'll compose, I'll find something, like again, I was preparing for this demo, and thinking about what I'd like to do. And again, I wanted to do this early spring scene with that spring light, which I haven't even started working on the light yet, but I wanted to work on something like this. So I went through my portfolios and was looking for, actually, I remembered these too. So I was looking for those in my portfolios. And then I went through and recomposed it for this size paper. You're welcome. If you want to leave it out or pass it, if others would like to see it. And on the palette right now, I've got these, well, it's almost one big puddle, but there are these separate areas of different hues. And I'm just sort of grabbing things and picking them up. So my palette looks like this at this point, with lots of different colors spread all over the place. And when at this stage of the painting, I'm looking for, do I need something warm? Do I need something that looks like it's light struck or not? Is it supposed to be shining and reflective or not? And that's how I decide what I'm going to pick up off the palette. I'm going to develop the bank here, and I think we're going to let it dry a little bit. I like working on wet paper, but it gets to the point where it's really needs to be a little drier, or I'm going to get into a bad situation. I tell my students all the time, don't paint on damp paper. It's the most dangerous condition of the paper in terms of getting streaks and mud and so I try to avoid it myself. Sometimes I do paint in there, but I think this paper is getting to the point where I'm going to have to dry it again.
Tony, you made mention earlier, are you working on 140?
Yeah, it's 140. Mm-hmm. It's Arches 140, which I don't know how many of you know. Maybe it might be as much as 10 years, probably not quite. Canson, you're probably familiar with Canson paper and Canson sketchbooks. They bought Arches. And I've been waiting for 10 years for them to change the paper, and they finally did it, and I'm not really happy with it, I have to tell you. It used to be more absorbent than it is now. And when you're working with a lot of water, you do need a paper that's got some ability to absorb water. And whatever Canson has done to the formula for Arches paper, they've removed some of that ability. I want to write them a nasty letter, but they're not going to pay attention anyway. So I'm sure it was done for money. So I am getting in a sense already of weeds that might be growing at the edge of the road or down the edge of the bank. And I do put in things like this at this point because, again, I get the soft textures. Right, we all like to, especially, well, sometimes we do it at the beginning, but we like to get out that skinny little brush and paint in 16,000 weeds in our paintings, right? And I try to avoid that by getting some sense of ground cover, weeds, and so forth into the painting early. So I think this needs to be dried again. In fact, I'm sure of it. By the way, if you're happy with Arches, use Arches. But if you start to notice the next time you buy Arches, if you start noticing that it's not working the way you thought it should or used to, and you want an alternative, Saunders is a really good alternative to Arches. They make a 140, a 260, and a 300.
Yeah, I can always do that. Do you wash the paper before painting to remove the sizing?
I don't, which would be something to try for the arches the way it is now. I think it is pretty heavily sized. That's the big change they made to it, which makes me suspicious that they changed the quality of the paper as well. Because that's generally what manufacturers tend to heavily size the papers that are cheaper. And it makes me suspicious that they've changed it, but I have not soaked it and tried to get some of the sizing on. It's a good suggestion. Am I looking for it? Oh. So, I do, for studio work, I do compositional work in sketchbooks. Actually, this one's got things that are, these are sketches from outdoors as well. But I do compositional work in a sketchbook back in the studio. And I'll find something and, a scene that I want to do for a demo or not, maybe not a demo, but just a painting I'd like to do. And I do the compositional work here. And in fact, I did it, this one is apparently one I want to transfer because I put tracing paper over it, but I haven't transferred it yet. So this one I worked out here. All right, let's see what we got. So by working this way, fluidly working the whole paper, getting a lot of color in thickly to begin with, and being a little bit loose and somewhat random with what I'm doing, I do get the composition in. I get the major elements in. I get the major shapes in. I get value and color in all over the paper. And so I get to the point where I'm ready to sort of finish up pretty quickly. And I'm doing this for the demo. I have limited time here. That's part of the reason. But I paint this way in the studio as well.
Could you show a few of these sketches for the?
Oh, yes, sure. So I do, that's a long note to myself about composition. So I do, some of these are sketches on location. Some of them were done for compositional reasons. You can see I've got notes and dates, and the piece that's over here, nobody on Zoom has seen it. So this painting I brought for the audience here in the room to see. So this painting, there we go. You see better without the glare on it.
Yeah.
So that painting was the one that caused me to miss the most recent board meeting. And it's based on this sketch, which was done in 2017. And again, I was looking for something to paint whatever day that meeting was. I was looking for something to paint. And I found this sketch and I did, actually I got another sketchbook back in the studio where I did the studies, the value and the color studies. It's based on that sketch from 2017. And I don't know what I tore out there, something I really didn't like maybe, I don't know. But, so again, compositional work. Some of these have become paintings, some of them have not. This one became a painting. So this is some compositional work on this scene that I'm doing here. So I did some work on it there and then transferred it over here. To this. I considered doing this today, but decided on that one. All right. So I think we can start bringing this to a finish. I'll probably talk less now. It takes more concentration at this point. So if there's a question, just shout it out. I'll answer it as soon as I can spare the brain bandwidth. Okay, so I'm going to start back there with the tree lines. There's one that's pretty prominent here on the right, and maybe here on the left. Actually, I'm going to get some clean water.
Get it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I'll start to refine the areas of the painting that need it in order to start bringing this up to a more representational stage of finish. Not how long I've been at this. 4 o'clock. So I've been at this for about 40 minutes, right? So hopefully in the next half hour, I'll get it finished.
Well, you want me to empty this one for you, too?
No, that's the dirty one's okay. It's just,
Okay, you just need, I got it.
Yep. All right. So actually, I was going to start here on the right on that tree line, but I'm going to start back here on the left instead. This one, in the way it's designed, is a bit farther away, so it'll be lighter and and again, I mentioned the directional quality when I was working down here with the tire tracks, but I want the same thing back here now. This is a tree line, so that means these trees grow obviously more or less vertically. So I'm making more or less vertical strokes. And I get actually much of the work done. The symbolic work, right? We're when we paint, we're not really painting anything real, are we? We're painting shapes. The shapes are hopefully going to represent what it is that we are painting, the subject we're painting. And there's some symbolism involved. And if you make the symbols right, then the shape reads as being representative of the thing that it is that you're painting. And again, I don't really like the hard edges, so I'm going to mute those. And while that's wet, this is where I'll get out the skinny little brushes. And again, with thicker paint. It's a little bit green, so I'll put some red in it. I will give some indication of individual tree trunks. And again, I put them in, this is drier paint, so this is more or less dry and wet rather than wet and wet. And it allows me to get these shapes in with shapes in a way that makes them appear to be, again, symbolically, they look like trees and tree trunks and so forth, but they sit in that space softly. So they recede into the distance, first of all. They just hint at the fact that there are trees back there. And again, with softer edges rather than harder edges. I'm going to pull maybe a individual trunk or two out here, start it this way. Now, there's, again, warm light coming from the left. That means this group of trees would be casting shadow in that direction. And I'll put that in now. You know, you could wait. But the cast shadows in general are a surefire way to show sunlight. As soon as you put in something like this, it starts to look like an object's casting a shadow, particularly if you put it across a piece of flat ground like this.
You ever re-wet dry paint?
Sometimes. Sometimes I have to. I'll get some of that in, essentially on the ground plane in the forest itself. And this is pretty thick paint, again. But again, I put them in. It's thick paint, but it's in a fluid area, so it blends softly. It has distinct edges, but it blends softly. I can pull up the edge of this foreground tree here, reestablish that a little bit. I'll do the same thing over here on the right now, a little bit more distinctly. And in fact, I'm going to change the color. This is cerulean and burnt scarlet together. So it's a bit grayer. It's got a little bit more density to it. Near this left side where there's light hitting, I'll go in and get some warmth on that in a second. But again, I work nice and fluid, even smaller areas and smaller marks. And again, some vertical strokes of paint to help that idea that these are trees and they grow vertically. And warm it up. This is mostly raw sienna, but I put it in the puddle of, actually I picked up some of the cerulean yellow as well. And I'll get that into the areas over here to the left where there would be more light hitting. And again, that bottom edge, soften that up. So soft edges join things, hard edges separate them, which is one of the reasons I like to get the soft edges in the painting. And then this tree line is a little closer to us, so we would probably get a little better sense of the at this point in the year, the ragged tops, you know, the thin branches that are up there. We probably get a better sense of that than we do on that more distant tree line. So I'll get some more or less rough edged work here. And the same thing with the skinny brush. I'll get some indications of individual tree trunks. I don't really want it blue, but it's kind of a neat little effect there. I'm going to mute it some. And of course, by dragging one color through a wet area, you're picking up some of that wet color that's already on the paper, and the color that's on the brush will mix and mingle with it, changing the color, getting some visual variety back in there that really, I think, helps the visual interest in the painting. And even with these colors aren't that unreal, but sometimes I paint with colors that are a little bit kind of out of register for the scene that I'm doing or the time of day. But these nice variations you get in color and value by adding one color into an already wet passage creates that visual, what I like to think of as visual realism. You know, the changes in colors. You can look, of course, you can argue with me because you could go out and find a field, I'm sure right here in Plymouth, and take me by the scrawny neck and drag me over there and say, look at those trees are all gray. Yes, they are. It's true. But getting the visual interest in a passage like this just helps enliven the painting, and that's the reason I do it. All right, let me get to work on the foreground trees. They're very important actually for the scene itself, the light that we're going to be putting in. I'll work on this guy first. I'm trying to find on the palette colors that are just basically neutral. And if they have a little color character to them, this has got a little bit of a yellow character to it. I can just add something if I don't like what it is, but I think I'm okay with it. And I'll darken that shady side. Again, these are not big marks, but they are wet, so I can drop other colors in. I like bounced light. I like to get a lot of bounced light in the shady side of things like trees, so I'll put some really kind of bright yellow back on that shady side there. And then for a real gray, the mixture of burnt scarlet and cerulean is how I really can get a good gray out of these, out of this particular palette. So I'll put some of that in. And this is, it's drawn the way, kind of structured the way a maple would be, but I don't really know what, I didn't have a particular tree in mind when I drew it. That looks kind of like a maple. I do try to leave light, unpainted spots on the branches that indicate where there's light hitting, depending on the way the branch twists and turns in there. Oops. Sometimes that happens. All right. A little bit more of the structure on this tree, and then I'll go into some of these others. Oh, actually, the cast shadow. So we need a cast shadow. If I want to show this as a bright sunny day, there would be cast shadow back there. It's going to come from about here. Work back into that field. I've got some, as you can see, some warmth in it right now. It probably should be cooler near the trunk, so I'll cool it off. And then I'll warm it up again as I get out here. And again, it's a surefire way to turn on the light, is to cast a shadow. Let's get these other guys in. And again, I sort of just pick up what's on the palette. It doesn't have to be a particular gray or a particular brown. It just needs to be kind of the approximate color of a tree trunk. Again, gray or brown. I do let it, in areas where I'm passing over something that's darker, I leave the white paper, and I'll connect those a little bit later. The bottom edges of trees I soften so that they're sitting down in the grasses or the mud or whatever it is that they're sitting in. So I soften those bottom edges. The shadow from this tree is really important. Again, for that idea of light. And it also helps me define the contour of this piece of ground here in the foreground. So instead of going straight up the hill as if it's this one continuous unending slope, I can do things like this and make the ground have some shape and form and contour. And shadows are great for that. And again, I tend to soften them. Obviously, I'm filling out the little bit of the upper part of the trees. Questions? Anything? No? Everything's either completely clear or completely confusing, so.
Have you put reflections in the puddle?
Yes, I am. I just wanted to fill out these trees over here first, a little bit. So the reflections in the puddles got started when I put the initial layer of color in. A lot of that blue, if you remember how blue it was down here when I first layered in that initial wash, it really doesn't even show now. It now just looks like white paper. I have a brush stroke that went in here. It shouldn't have gone there. I put it in, painted it in carelessly, but I left it thinking this would be something I may be able to work with, so I left it in there. So tire tracks, ruts obviously they have vertical sides and a flat bottom, and they may have water in them. So there's water, there's a puddle here. The water maybe comes up to about there. Whoops. I want yellow in there. To about here and maybe there. So that means this is mud down in this area. And then the sides are going to be darker. I have some different colors around both sides of those tracks, those ruts. I want to make sure that I have enough contrast between what's in the rut that it stands out and looks different than the sort of the muddy, flat part of the road. So down in here, I'm going to get some very cool color. This is going to be a lot of cerulean to start. And then as it goes back and gets warmer back there, I'm going to keep it cool on this side. And I think really warm it up. I need to warm it, but also darken it. So burnt umber, I think. Maybe a little bit of I've got burnt umber and a little cerulean on the brush now. And I want something really dark on the other side. I was going to use the burnt umber, but I think I'm going to go back to the burnt scarlet and cerulean mixture. This is really of the colors I have available that are still going to have a little bit of coolness to them. That's the darkest one I can get. I'm going to leave that little bit of white right there. It's a nice highlight. And I'm going to, since I've got it on the brush, I'm going to get it onto this rut as well. And then I think I want a little bit more sense of muddiness here. So I'm mingling in a little bit more of the, I don't know what it is. It's some brown off the palette. And I'm going to get that in here. And carry that both tire tracks out a little bit. There's a white bit of paper showing there that I didn't plan, but it actually works out pretty well. Then in the puddle, I'll get some blue, and that's too much, but it's okay. I'm going to get some clear water on it. Well, actually, I don't have clear water, but I'm putting some muddy water on it. And I'll bring that up into these two ruts. And then really the same approach. Get some of that dark. In this case, we're only seeing one of the vertical sides of the ruts. And I let them disappear down into the puddle itself. And I step back and make sure it looks right. And again, I've got a really hard edge here. I don't like overwhelming hard edges, so I'll soften some of it. I could even maybe roughen it a little bit. This one's already got a nice rough edge on it. And then here I need something probably a little bit cooler than that. Again, to get that muddy, I want to leave some of the white paper too, but some of that muddy reflectiveness. And then for reflections, this tree is going to be reflecting in the puddle right there. It doesn't have to be the exact same color as the tree. In fact, it wouldn't be. The mud itself would be adding its own hue, if you will, to the reflection. So it can be darker. In fact, it should be darker than that. There's some darkness there, would be reflecting in that puddle. Some there, probably reflecting a little bit down in here. There's a dark edge on the bank of the hill. I left white paper, which probably shouldn't be there, but maybe I'll obscure it a little bit. So I'll go along the bottom edge here and get, again, a rough, I like rough edges along things, objects like this. So get some rough edge. And then again, since this puddle's still wet, I can get the reflection of it. And I feel like there's an edge here that needs to be fixed. And then what really helps something look reflective, a puddle, a pond, is to get something dark right at the edge. Real dark reflection, like right here. In fact, I'm going to flatten it down here a little bit. And while that's still wet, I think I need a little bit of a lift there. I'd like this area to be a little bit lighter than it is. And you can see even the thick paint that I put in here to make this reflection has blended and softened. So I'm going to go back to that and here, maybe a little bit here. And now I'm just kind of adding texture. The paint, I don't know how we're doing on time.
We're about 4:30 right now, 4:35. So.
Okay. The things that are left to do are essentially get the branches on the trees and try to enhance the light any place that I can. I'm looking for spots that I might be able to. These trees need cast shadows on them. I can get shadow that actually comes down the ground plane here and then over the road. That would actually be a nice way to increase the reflectiveness of the puddle. But overall, I think it's come along. Everybody have a little bit more time? Okay. Let's say 15 minutes. How about that? And I'll be done.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. The audience is quiet, so I'm never sure if people fell asleep or,
We got a question. What is the advantage of using Aeolian
cerulean yellow.
mixture as opposed to using that and adding your pigment of choice?
I wouldn't say there's a big advantage to it at all. What it is a really cerulean, whether it's the Da Vinci cerulean mix is what they call it, or the cobalt yellow cerulean from Daniel Smith. They're both solid, cool yellows that keep their strength, especially in mixtures. And when you need a bright passage, either one of them really works. And it's surprising, you wouldn't think this, but the cool yellows actually work better in summer scenes when, you think, oh, summer, it's warm, I should use warm yellows. The cool yellows work better. And that cerulean is a really nice, solid, strong, it's got color strength, tinting strength to it, and it works really well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but at least it answers the question I think was being asked. If it's not that question is being asked, let me know. Some branches on these trees. And this is, of course, the fun brush, the rigger. It's actually too much fun, really. I would probably like to develop the light on some of the branches of this tree a little better. I'm not going to do that, I think, here. It'll take a lot of time. But it's something I'll probably do back in the studio. Things like this. This would darken up part of that branch and make it look like there's light on part of it and shadow on part of it. Even at this stage, again, not quite done, but at this stage, that sense of light is there, the nice warm light, that bright, warming sun in early spring. I think that that's there, which was the objective. And the work that needs to be done really is refining shapes that aren't reading well. That's what I would do at this point. The track that runs down into the puddle here, for instance. It doesn't read well. It doesn't read well over here either. So I need to get a little bit more indication of those tire tracks, those ruts working down into the puddle. I could get more texture on the trunks of the trees. I don't know that this is real important, but if I wanted to do something like that, I would do it with this dry brush that's a little bit split. Weeds. Oh, by the way, I do weeds with we want to take this rigor and do every weed, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have to count to 10,000 to get all the weeds in. But rather than doing that, I take the side of the brush and I do this. And I get that sense of groups of weeds together. Quickly and easily. And again, I get that textural quality, the rough, in this case, rough work. This is dry brush, really. For a scene like this, it just adds a little bit of that additional reality, that sense that There are weeds growing here. There are trees here, but there are weeds growing here as well. And then I will make a few individuals like this one. Nobody believes me, but I tell people this is the lazy man's medium because it'll do so much for you if you let it. And I'm a lazy man, so it works really well for me. I'm not actually that lazy, but. And again, all that's left, I think, would be things like branches. These trees could be developed a little bit more. This is the kind of work that we do at the end of the painting. And again, sometimes it gets out of hand. We do too much of it. I try not to do that. I try to put in a little bit and then step back and do a little bit more. You can see how fun it is. Take this brush and just let it kind of wander over the paper.
Tony, do you like to come back days later and do anything, or do you like to get everything done that day?
And I almost always come back. Usually it's not days later, but what I do, in fact, what I'll do with this is I'll get it, when I get it back to the studio this evening, I'll set it up someplace where I can see it, walk by it regularly and take a glance and see if something looks out of place or out of kilter and try to fix it if I find something like that. I think I'll leave it there. Again, it's not quite done, but I think I'll leave it where it is. Good. Yeah, and whoever drove through it got through. They went right on. They didn't get stuck.